Saluting Veterans, a KSN News 3 special, sponsored by the Devon James Injury Lawyers.
Thanks so much for joining me on this Veterans Day. I'm Mike Mahoney, and today we are honoring the work and sacrifice of Kansas veterans. The VA estimates that there are about 181,000 veterans living in Kansas today, and we're going to share a few of their stories over the next half hour. And we'll start with a veteran who received the call to serve overseas 3 times. And each tour held a very different task, and once he got home, his service didn't stop. Perry grew up in Amarita, Oklahoma, and joined the Army National Guard at age 17 in 1992 before he completed high school.
Grew up pretty poor and didn't have a whole lot and needed something to go on, and the military was the calling, and that's where I went.
With high school behind him, Chris soon found himself in infantry school with the National Guard while also going to college and becoming a volunteer firefighter in Amarita and Byron, Oklahoma.
Yeah, I did pretty good with the fire and rescue deal. I was the youngest, I think, at the time, and the smallest, so I always got to go into the attics.
Chris was deployed to Iraq for the first time in 2002 and found himself in a very tense and dangerous situation after his unit outran their supplies and was stuck in Taji, a town almost 20 miles north of Baghdad.
I think 1 MRE and 2 bottles of water a day, so we went strictly night ops. We didn't even have enough supply to run anything during the day.
Relief forces got Chris and his team out of Taji, and after returning to the U.S., he moved to Wichita to work at an ethanol plant. But Chris's Army career was far from over, and in 2005 he was sent back to Iraq to provide security for the Special Forces compound. Chris says the second deployment was more dangerous than the first, but just like last time, his teammates were always watching his back.
RPG attacks, random sporadic fire, grenades thrown at us, just random, all the time, everything's random. And then it's just, those guys have got you every day, all day. And it doesn't matter what time of day, you need to talk to somebody, there's somebody to talk to.
Chris returned to the air capital after a year and a half, but the Army National Guard had one last deployment for him. Around 2010, he was sent to Burundi in Africa to help teach the country's soldiers, and this time, security was provided for him.
It was what I would call my vacation tour, because it was stress-free for the most part. I really didn't have to think about security. I didn't have to think about anything other than teaching a class.
Chris would return to the air capital and stay in the U.S. before retiring from the Army in 2015 as a sergeant first class. But not before one last major assignment, training our Army's future snipers from the state of Kansas.
That's the one thing we really tried to push was, if you're going to do it, you got to do it and you got to mean it. Memorization, learning how to get specific details and bring it forth to the table later.
Chris is enjoying his retirement these days in Wichita, and a big reason why is because of all his brothers and sisters at Wichita VFW 3115.
Try to keep the veterans coming in. We try to recruit as many as we can and do it as much as we can for the community and the other veterans that we don't ever see.
Our next veteran spent most of his adult life in the Kansas Army National Guard and is grateful for all the opportunities it brought. Utah's Aaron Reynolds has always been inspired by the men and women who serve our country, but a national tragedy took that admiration to another level.
I was 7th grade whenever like 9/11 happened, so of course that sparked, another interest and want to serve somehow.
Aaron joined up with the Kansas Army National Guard in 2008 and trained to be infantry. Around 2009, he began training for his first big deployment, focusing on search and rescue operations in Djibouti, Africa.
It was pretty surreal just being there and experiencing, a different culture, for sure. When I was there, the platoon that I was with, we got to do a lot of joint training and operations with other branches and stuff that a lot of people didn't necessarily get to experience, so that was pretty cool.
The next major milestone of Aaron's Army career came after he returned to Wichita and was promoted to sergeant.
I'm actually able to, not only be a part of a team, but help lead a team and kind of help mold the people that, come after me, so that way they can step into a leadership role when, you know, their time comes.
And those leadership skills would be necessary for Aaron during his second deployment in 2018, where he was sent to both Syria and Kuwait, spending part of his time on a support mission training with allies.
I wasn't just responsible for me. You know, I was responsible for X, Y, and, you know, making sure they were ready to go and they were prepared for what we needed to do for whether training, mission purposes, or whatever.
Aaron would do one more overseas deployment, and a few months after that, he made a major change by going active duty with the Kansas Army National Guard, serving in a logistical role.
It's definitely been a learning curve, spending, you know, over a decade in more of a combat arms type job, and then coming and doing something completely different outside of, you know, my wheelhouse.
There are many reasons Sergeant Aaron Reynolds has stuck with the Kansas Army National Guard throughout the years, from seeing the world to making his family proud.
It's been a sense of pride for them having somebody, you know, this generation, especially spending this long in the military, to still kind of stick with it and, you know, love what they do.
The vast majority of veterans living in Kansas, that's about 144,000, served during a conflict. More than 90,000 served during the Gulf War era, another 53,000 served during Vietnam, and 4,500 Kansas veterans served in Korea. Less than 0.5% of the veterans who served in World War II are believed to still be living today. The National World War II Museum estimated earlier this year that there are still about 240 living World War II veterans here in Kansas. Our next veteran earned 2 Purple Hearts while serving in Vietnam, and he says that his time in the service came with mixed experiences. Michael McVeigh was drafted into the Army in 1966 and served as an infantryman in Vietnam. And while he is proud of serving his country, he didn't like what he was doing over there.
Our mission was to see, search, and destroy. And that was something I had a problem with.
Mike says he felt for the Vietnamese citizens caught in the crossfire and was also saddened by the Army's use of Agent Orange.
We go home, and he's still there. It's there for lots of years, and that's too bad.
Mike also earned 2 Purple Hearts fighting in Vietnam. The first battle wound involved him getting shot in the arm, but it was nothing compared to his encounter with a landmine.
It was strong. And I was 10, 15 feet in the air.
That mine put shrapnel in Mike's legs, back, and head, but miraculously didn't take his ability to walk. But it did send him home, and he left the Army as a buck sergeant in 1968. Mike came home to Wichita and worked as a cook and also for Boeing, but suffered health issues later in life. But he says he is doing great these days at the Dove Estates thanks to top-notch local care.
Other than a stroke, I'm pretty healthy. I mean, VA thinks VA in Wichita is name #1.
More than 5 decades after joining the Marines, one Kansas veteran says that he is still overcoming emotional wounds from losing close friends on the battlefield. And he told me about the battles he faces every day. Dodge City native Jesse Ramos answered the call to service in 1968 by joining the Marines.
I really did like the Marine Corps uniforms, but I think maybe once I got involved, I had a little different tune about it.
After completing his training, Jesse soon found himself in Da Nang serving in the Marine Corps Infantry. His 12 months in Vietnam were spent patrolling the jungle, protecting American artillery, and constantly fighting for his life.
You were on the alert all the time. You had to keep your eyes open. You just had to watch out for booby traps, anything when you were walking through the jungle. You just never knew what could come up.
Jesse did his best to stay on his toes, but eventually got injured when a tank he was riding on struck a landmine.
It blew me up in the air probably 10 to 20 feet in the air. But the person that was sitting right in front of me, it pulled his legs down, he lost the leg.
Jesse received a Purple Heart for that injury and for injuries he got during a firefight with the Viet Cong. But when he looks back on his time in Vietnam, he can't help but remember the ultimate sacrifice 2 of his teammates made.
2 buddies of mine hit a booby trap and it killed them. So that was just another time that I thought it wasn't my time to go.
Jesse has been shaken by the horrors of war, but has found peace through talking to others, and he encourages his fellow veterans to do the same.
If a veteran's having a lot of problems, to seek help, not to let it go, because sometimes it will only get worse.
If you or somebody that you know is in need of help, there are resources. Call 988. That is the crisis line available to anybody 24/7. But veterans can then press 1 for special veteran support. You can also text 838-255 or chat online with a VA representative. The help is always free and confidential, and we have these resources on our website, KSN.com. Our next veteran service started with a focus on electronic warfare in the Navy, but he would continue to expand his skills during his 2-decade career.
An uncle that retired in the Navy as a Master Chief, and I kind of looked up to him for that.
Wichita native Galen Klein made that uncle proud when he followed in his footsteps and enlisted in the Navy in 1975. He soon found himself training in electronic warfare.
The basic precept of electronic warfare is detection and deception. If we had enough radars in the same bearing, we were able to determine the class of ship.
Galen spent his career primarily patrolling the Pacific on 4 separate ships, and his first was the USS Cochrane.
It was an eye-opening experience, you know, being from the wheat fields and stuff like that. But I really enjoyed the ship.
After 2.5 years, Galen was transferred to the USS Ranger, an aircraft carrier that patrolled the Indian Ocean during the Iran hostage crisis.
Prevent the Iranians from choking off ships transiting the Persian Gulf.
Galen's next assignment was at the Naval Technical Training Center in Pensacola, where he served as a naval instructor and was promoted to Chief Petty Officer.
It was nice to go to a restaurant or to a bar, you know, just to sit down and have a couple. You know, sleeping on the world's largest waterbed gets old after a while.
Galen found himself headed back to the Pacific for his 3rd ship assignment and ended up spending a half-decade on the USS Whipple. Now he was handling more than just tracking equipment.
I had to relearn my role because it was more leadership and management at that time when I made chief.
Following his time on the Whipple, Galen was sent to San Diego, where he focused on Navy management supply support while learning about computers. He had his eyes on retirement, but had one last tour that took him to Japan. He served on the USS Mobile Bay and happened to meet a very special woman from Salina while he was out there.
We tell the story of how we met. And I say, well, I had to go 6,000 miles to meet my wife.
Galen retired at the age of 38 as a chief electronics warfare technician and returned to the air capital, where he got married, had a child, and a career in IT. When reflecting on his 20 years of service, he focuses on the good he saw in the people in the 25 countries that he visited.
Most of the people that I've met from the different countries I've been to were very nice, very polite, quite welcoming.
Our next veteran is one of more than 19,000 women living in Kansas who has served in the military. And she had 2 chapters of service, starting in the Army and later in the Kansas National Guard.
Was a World War II veteran. I always admired him, and I wanted to be like my dad. So in 1975, I joined the Army.
Wanda Gale Collins made her father proud and trained to become an ammunition storage specialist, spending her Army career shipping, receiving, and inspecting ammunition from small arms all the way up to missiles.
I could have had a desk job, but I've always been a tomboy, and I like being outside, working with my hands, so I chose that.
Gale spent her first 1.5 years at Fort Stewart in Georgia and did some trailblazing when she wasn't inspecting ammo.
I got another lady from the unit, and me and her were the first 2 females to ever make it through guerrilla warfare training with the 5th Special Forces Group.
Eventually, Gale was transferred to Germany, and while she loved learning about other cultures, the behavior of her co-workers became a major problem.
I was sexually harassed for the time that I was in Germany, the whole time I was there. And To this day, I suffer from PTSD because of it.
Gail came home and left the Army after 6 years and made her way to Wichita, but eventually decided to re-enlist, this time with the Kansas Army National Guard, and things were going to be different this time.
I went in with the attitude that, you know, I'm not taking nothing off of these guys, and I guess I got my point across pretty good because they seemed to value my opinions on things, and they did not cross me.
Gail would go on to spend 12 years with the National Guard as a semi-truck driver and was getting ready to serve in Iraq when a knee injury ended her military career. She got out as a sergeant in 2005, and despite the challenges she faced earlier in her career, Gail does not regret serving her country in the Army.
From basic training on, you learned that you were going to be independent. You learned to be disciplined, and it just sticks with you.
A 93-year-old Colwich native has lived in that area his entire life, except for the 2 years he spent as a combat medic in the Army.
My grandparents had 47 grandkids, 21 girls and 26 boys. 21 of those 26 boys served in the military.
Service is a tradition for Sylvester Brand's family, but for him, it wasn't a choice. He was drafted to the Army in 1955 and trained to be a combat medic.
Artificial respiration, how to apply tourniquets, how to amputate arms or legs when they're half shot off, this kind of thing.
Sylvester served for 2 years taking care of his fellow soldiers at Fort Carson in Colorado, Fort McCoy in Wisconsin, and Camp Hale in Colorado.
I gave hundreds of penicillin and streptomycin shots, both summers, 55 and 56.
Sylvester was discharged in 1957 and came back to Colwich, where he continued to serve his country through his work at Boeing for 31 years.
I helped build military airplanes, B-52, KC-130. I helped build military helicopters, pilotless drone spy plane, rocket launcher, 2 Air Force One, President of the United States flies in Fort Mary. I helped build the first stage of the Saturn missile that took American astronaut to the moon.
And in retirement, he gave 17 years volunteering at the Holy Savior Food Pantry. Before we conclude our Veterans Day special, we want to introduce you to an Army combat engineer whose work helped train soldiers.
Loved it. I really loved it. Yep. I thought I was top dog.
Wichita native Daryl Ensley has fond memories of his 3 years serving as a combat engineer in the U.S. Army and isn't too sore about being turned down by the Navy.
They said I was colorblind. So after that, I went to the Army and they said, welcome.
From 1958 to 1961, you could find Daryl riding one of the Army's Caterpillar bulldozers and taking pride in the things he built for his fellow troops.
Just that certain feeling that you had that you're doing something good.
After learning how to operate a bulldozer at Fort Hood, Texas, Daryl spent his career helping build bridges and firing ranges for infantry training. But the highlight of his career came when he helped reopen Fort Polk in Louisiana.
We did the buildings, the street, the parking lots, whatever they needed fixed.
Daryl left the Army as a corporal in 1961, returned to the Air Capital, and went on to work for Highland Dairy for 35 years. He says he would happily do his Army service all over again because of what it taught him.
They said there's the right way, the wrong way, and the Army way. And they taught you the right way of doing everything. And I'll never forgot that.
I am honored to tell our Veteran Salute stories each week right here on KSN News. If you'd like to nominate someone, just reach out to me at mmahoney@ksn.com. You can check out all those Veteran Salute stories on ksn.com. Thanks so much for tuning in, and God bless.